Good morning, Friendship United Methodist Church. I'd like to welcome you on this 6th day of October 2024. Reverend Neil Parker of Burnaby, British Columbia, says he insists on only two things before he performs a wedding. He must meet with the bride and the groom before the ceremony, and he doesn't do weddings in unusual places like parachuting or underwater. But he broke both of these rules once. And he had agreed to do this wedding on 2 days' notice when the minister who was to officiate was unavailable due to a family emergency. He had the details of the location. It was well out of town on a farm. He knew the names of the bride and the groom, and he knew that they had done their premarital counseling. He also knew that the congregation would consist of 140 bikers who had come up for the weekend, gathered on this farm. And the wedding was to be a surprise to all but a few of the guests. Reverend Parker had considerable misgivings as he turned off the highway and he caught his first glimpse of the site. Motorcycles filled the parking lot. Most were Harleys. Very loud music filled the air from a tent and refreshment area. And it looked, he said, like a heavy metal Woodstock. And the pastor parked his Volkswagen Jetta. Gosh, did he feel out of place. And he headed up to the house. And to his relief, things seemed to be in order there. He was introduced to the bride's parents and the groom's parents while the bride was getting dressed. And it didn't take long. She wore jeans and a black t-shirt, a few flowers in her hair, and the groom was introduced to him as Bear. He outweighed Pastor by about 2 to 1, a little over 2 to 1, big burly guy. His beard was thick and heavy, and his arms were heavily tattooed, and Bear didn't say much. Big, quiet guy. And once Reverend Parker checked to see that the license was in order, everything was ready, he headed down to the big tent. Struggling through the crowd of bikers, he asked for a microphone. He waited for the music to go silent, introduced himself, and announced that he was here to do a wedding. He wasn't quite sure what reaction he would get. Several of the bikers immediately headed to the parking lot. The air was filled with the roar of Harley-Davidson engines. Then, with almost military precision, the bike streamed out of the parking lot and straight towards the pastor. Only a few feet from him, they turned off to form a double row facing each other, an honor guard to create an aisle for the bride. With the engines roaring full throttle, they echoed across the valley. And as the bride walked slowly and gracefully down the aisle, each bike she passed switched off the engine. As she passed the last pair and all the engine were stilled, you could have heard a pin drop. The bride walked shyly up to Bear. His eyes were overflowing with tears. And then the birds began to sing, and all around the host couple were the congregation of their friends, family members, families of sober riders, each one a recovering alcoholic, each one a biker, and each was bowed in prayer at this holy moment. The bride had given Reverend Parker only one instruction for the service. Make sure you have a sermon, she said. These people want to hear a word from God. Parker stood in the middle of this field in a congregation of t-shirts and jeans and tattoos in front of the groom and the bride who knew exactly what they were doing and why. In a cathedral of fence posts and Harleys, and they gave thanks to God together. Let's imagine, guys, for a few moments that you and I are standing in that meadow circled by motorcycles with Bear and his bride. And imagine that I am the pastor that's presiding over the ceremony. And that may not seem too difficult with you, but to tell the truth, I have a difficult time imagining some of you guys heavily tattooed and riding Harleys. But let's suspend our critical faculties for a moment and imagine that we are there. The birds are singing, the bride is radiant, Bear has tears running down his face, and all these bikers are waiting expectantly for a word from God. What could I say about marriage in that auspicious setting and be faithful to the biblical text? What would you say? I'm waiting. As for me, I think first of all, I would say that marriage is a serious business to God. The Pharisees were testing Jesus. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And they reminded Jesus that Moses, they liked the law of Moses, and they had all these laws back then. Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of divorce. And Jesus answered them by going back to Genesis, all the way back to the beginning, going back to the Genesis account of the first marriage. Have you not read, he said, that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. So they are no longer two, but one. What therefore God has joined together, let no one put asunder. Matthew 19, 4-6. And this answer shocked the Pharisees. See, they liked the laws of Moses. Now, in Jesus' time, no one questioned the legitimacy of divorce. The only question was what constituted adequate grounds. And Jesus said there were no grounds. What God has joined together. Friends, God takes marriage seriously. We need to see that. That's why it says, thou shalt not commit adultery is included right along with thou shalt not kill in the Ten Commandments. God takes marriage seriously, friends. And Jesus took marriage seriously. There were many things that Jesus was quite liberal on for the day in which he lived. There were other things about which he was quite conservative. And here he is downright reactionary. What God has joined together, let no one put asunder. Does that mean that Jesus would have nothing to do with divorced persons? Absolutely not. Absolutely not, friends. And I'm the first to say, persons in abusive relationships, verbal or physical, it's tough. I know that. Read about Jesus' encounter with the woman at the well, who had lived with several men, or the woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. It shows Jesus' love and compassion and mercy. So he will accept us, Lord, those who have been divorced. No one, friends, was more compassionate than Jesus. Jesus knew about the human weaknesses and frailty. He knows all about us, guys. Jesus met no one that he could not forgive and have communion with. Still, he took marriage seriously, and so should we. No relationship strikes more at the center of what it means to be a human being than does marriage. And the end of a marriage can be devastating, even more devastating than death, really, because you see that person. They may live near to I, they may have moved, but it's more difficult than death a lot of times. And the effects on the children are well known and well documented. And I believe that the breakdown of the traditional family unit has created a lot of the problems in our society today. Those, friends, are the facts. And of course, each situation is different, and we respect that. Still, the breakup of a family is serious business because God takes marriage seriously. I believe that is the first thing I would say to Bear, his bride, and their assorted guests. And the second thing I might say is that there are no perfect marriages. In spite of what you may have heard, no marriage is truly made in heaven, friends. Good marriages are made through a lot of give and take here on earth. It's like one woman who accompanied her husband to the doctor for his physical. And the doctor asked for a private conversation before they left. So he had a private conversation with her. And he said, "Your husband is under great stress, and you must devote your life to sheltering him. Don't argue or disagree with him. Get up every morning and fix his favorite breakfast. Spend the morning cleaning the house, but have a nice lunch ready in case he decides to come home. The afternoon you can spend on outside work, but make sure there's a special dinner waiting for him when he returns. The evening hours may be spent watching TV or a game on the TV or your favorite show that he has, followed by romance, should he be interested. And this must be your schedule to help him through this." And the wife left the office, picked up her husband, and drove home. Well, he asked on the way, "What did the doctor say?" He said, "You're going to die." Now, I don't want to burst anyone's bubble, but ideal marriages are very difficult to find, friends. I didn't say there were not happy marriages, nor did I say that marriage cannot be very fulfilling. There was a time when most people preferred marriage to the single life, and I think we will see a return to it. But changing times in my lifetime has seen this fall off. Prayerfully, like I said, I believe it will return. All I'm saying, though, is that there are no perfect marriages. Want some evidence? Show me a perfect marriage in the Bible. Adam and Eve, one of their boys murdered his brother. I doubt they had a perfect home. Abraham and Sarah. Abraham tried to pass her off as his sister. She could have ended up in Pharaoh's harem if the Pharaoh had not been compassionate. Isaac and Rebekah? You kidding me? Deceit, treachery, and envy became a way of life in the household as each tried to advance the fortune of his or her favorite son. Changing the subject on that a little bit, look at Mayberry RFD, Andy Griffith's show. Everyone on that show was single except Otis. He was the town drunk. Where is the perfect marriage then and now? But surely, Pastor Bob, you say, Mary and Joseph had the perfect marriage. And I have no doubt that Mary and Joseph were a terrific example of marital bliss. But would you classify a marriage as perfect when even before the wedding ceremony, the husband plans to quietly divorce his new bride as soon as they are married because he thinks she's carrying another person's child? There are family secrets throughout the sacred word. In fact, when we have a wedding ceremony and we search for the perfect words to describe the commitment we expect from bride and groom, we have to turn to the words of Ruth. Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And they are a promise Ruth made not to her husband, but to her mother-in-law. It's important to say to Bear and his bride that there are no perfect marriages. Maybe so. Half of the new marriages today do not last. I would like to see that increased and more people getting married. I want to share with you, I have a program that I use, and I'm running near 80% on successful marriages of couples that I've presided at their wedding over the years. I think 114. And I think that's a pretty good percentage. Maybe we haven't helped our young people understand that marriage takes work. It's not an easy task for two independent, strong-minded persons to become one flesh. Here are two people from different environments, and this is what I get into in premarital counseling. Differing expectations from life, and differing dreams for the future. Have you discussed this ahead of time? We need to look at this. And to make matters worse, one of them is a male and one is a female, right? And it's no accident that one of the best-selling books of our lifetime is titled Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. Men and women are different in miraculous ways, wonderful ways. They're different physically, of course. Studies show that the baby boys sleep less and are more active than baby girls. Women overall have a better memory for names and faces than men. Women are faster and more accurate in tasks requiring manual dexterity. If a woman is stuck behind an unmoving car, she's less likely to blow her horn than a man is. And surprise, surprise, she's more likely to ask for directions than a man is. And women, they smile more than men. The point is that men and women are different. And naturally, this creates tension. Anytime you have differences, you have tension. You're going to be one way or the other. And sometimes it causes pain. And sometimes anger. You're probably familiar with the dumb blonde jokes of times past. Maybe that's a good thing. But did you know that there was a dumb man's joke book published not too long after those came out? For example, what's the difference between a man and a cat? One is a finicky eater who couldn't care less if you lived or died, and the other is a house pet. Do you know what it means when a man comes home, who'd show you a little love and affection and a little tenderness? It means you're in the wrong house. Men and women are different, guys. Let's face it. Family backgrounds are different. Different people have different pictures in their minds of what an ideal marriage should be. Persons living together often, the longer they live together, the more problems they have if they decide to be married, and often end in divorce. Good example. Before you're married, guys, you're always taking the trash out. They take it out and they're being really nice to you, right? And then after you're married, all of a sudden, they're not taking the trash out. Why? Because their dad didn't take the trash out in their family. You see, it goes back to how we were raised, and they revert to that instead of trying to please you. Now they go back, and that's created a lot of problems in marriages, friends. We all have flaws that need to be forgiven from time to time. And that brings me to the last thing that I would say. By the grace of God, Bear, by the grace of God, great marriages are possible. God's plan is beautiful and most fulfilling. No one will ever improve on it. One man and one woman becoming one flesh until death do they part. That's the plan. That's God's plan. Not everyone will realize that kind of ideal arrangement in his or her life, but still it remains for most people, the ideal. Perhaps, I like the Rocky movies. I don't know about you, but perhaps you saw the first Rocky film with Sylvester Stallone. And do you remember the Rocky relationship and the love relationship Rocky had with Adrian in Rocky? She was the little wallflower who worked in the pet shop, the sister of Polly, an insensitive goon, if you will, who worked at the meat house and wanted to become a collector of debts for a loan shark. Polly couldn't understand why Rocky was attracted to Adrian, his sister. I don't see it, he said. What's the attraction? And do you remember Rocky's answer? Do you? Rocky said, I don't know. I don't know. Fills the gaps, I guess. What gaps? Well, she's got gaps, says Rocky. I got gaps. They fill the gaps. And in his simple but profound way, Rocky hit upon a great truth. He was saying that he and Adrian each had plenty of empty spaces in their life. But when the two of them got together, they filled those blank spots in one another as they became one. And that's exactly what God intended. God takes marriage very seriously. There are no perfect marriages, but there can be great marriages. Those great marriages occur when two people commit themselves to God and to one another, to become one flesh until death do they part. It's not an easy task, but with God's help, friends, it can be done. Now, this is the day when churches all over the world celebrate Worldwide Communion Sunday. We're going to do that after this sermon, later in the service. We recall how often Jesus compared the kingdom to a wedding feast. The church he called his bride. The bread and the cup are themselves instruments of God's grace. As we take this blessed sacrament, we confess again our need for God's help, not only in our marriages and in our families, but in every aspect of our lives. Amen.